So let's talk about nutrition and performance once more. And by the way, guys, if you haven't seen my tutorial on nutrition and performance 1, I do encourage you to sort of have a bit of a reflect on that, because it will be useful for you before we go on to this. Now, I've included the Eat Well plate here. I mean, it is sort of a UK thing, and yes, that is where I'm from. I guess you can tell from my accent. From the north of England, if you're interested, beautiful city called Carlisle. It's the best. But anyway, where am I going with this? I just wanted to introduce you to this Eat Well plate, because Eat Well guide, because it's kind of a useful thing. It shows you sort of the proportion of our diet that should come from certain environments, such as vegetables. Here's our carbs that we've mentioned previously. Here's our dairy, of course, source of things like protein, but also of fat. Here are things like protein-based, like lentils, chicken, fish, and so on. But notice that hydration is really important here. Notice that snacking and fast food is considered to be less relevant, but we do need certain fats, again, that small slither that's in there. That's what we call our Eat Well guide. And we previously mentioned these figures here for males and females per day, so it's interesting just to reflect on those. What I want to do today, though, is I want to focus a bit on the performance side of this, and I want to think really, well, when should we be eating what, and what should we be eating in relation to performance? So I want to think about what we should be eating before performance, what we should be eating during performance, depending, of course, on what type of activity we're involved in. If we're alpine skiing and we're trying to do a fast downhill, we might not be eating a sandwich, obviously. And we're going to go to after here. So what should we be eating before, during, and after performance? And I'm going to sort of culminate with a few other sort of specific things. Now then, let's think about before competition. What should we be doing? Well, our guidance is that performers should be eating something like 2 to 3 hours before, okay? And that something should be what we describe as a light meal. You know, we're not talking about a massive burger and chips here. We're talking about maybe, and I don't mean to be specific, but we're maybe talking about some rice, a piece of grilled fish. Something like this would be a pretty classic experience. This would be before 2 to 3 hours before. That's something you guys can apply, okay? But we've got a second phase. So if I put a little dotted line here, we've got a second phase, which is 30 to 60 minutes before performance. We're looking at some kind of fruit or some kind of snack. Now, I spent a lot of time in the kind of soccer, football environment, and a lot of people use things like Jelly Babies and Haribo and all this kind of stuff. Fruit would be more effective, okay? So bear that in mind. And of course, we want performers to be continually focusing on hydration. I mean, I've heard really good athletes say to me in the past, I've been very lucky to work with some good athletes, and they said to me, just continually sipping on water, never being far away from water is one of the key things that they do. So that's interesting to reflect on. What about during performance? And I guess we're assuming that this is some kind of longer activity. I don't know why, but I was thinking about road cycling in my mind. I do a bit of cycling myself. You can be out on the bike a long period of time. So first of all, we need performers to have what we'd refer to as an eating strategy. That's really important. You shouldn't be just eating for fun or because you're hungry. We want some kind of eating strategy. And what we're going to find is that performers will have what we call carb depletion, carbohydrate depletion, actually too little glycogen in the liver and muscle. We'll find that that's going to happen in about 120 minutes. Okay, so 2 hours into performance, if we are not taking on additional carbohydrates, we are going to find that carbohydrate depletion is going to take place. So therefore, we're going to have something which is carbs based. If we're going to eat during, that could be something like bananas, it could be something sugar-based. We're going to try and top that up. Another really typical thing that people will do is they'll take on what we call isotonic drinks, and these are drinks with appropriate amounts of sugar in them, or forms of simple sugars that can be absorbed nice and easily. In terms of after performance, guys, and I should say here, I mean, it goes without saying, we are once again talking about the need to rehydrate. That goes during performance. That's absolutely critical, of course. We've also got sort of the after factor here. So first of all, key focus is to rehydrate after performance. So we've mentioned that in all three. So that's a real key theme for us. But performers will tend to take on carbohydrates, and they'll tend to take on protein. Now, with carbohydrates, it depends on how hard a person's worked, but often people try and take on as much as possible, especially shortly after performance. With protein, we're looking at something optimal, like about 30 grams of protein. You'll find a lot of protein supplements are targeted around that kind of level. Now, before we finish off here, I want to talk about something specific with you. I want to talk to you about carbo loading. Carbo loading, let's write it in here. Carbo loading. Come on, let's go crazy and even give it a bit of an underline to give it a title. Wowzers. Okay, carbo loading is something that performers will do before performance, and we tend to think of it like a bowl of pasta the night before, something like that. But it's a little more complex than that. So let me give you a little insight into how this works. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I want to put a little table in here like this, and I'm going to get our ruler and I'm going to turn it onto its angle. I'm going to break this into. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Grabbed the wrong little dot there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break our table into 3 areas. So there's 1, there's 2. Never equal, are they, when I do these things? There's 2, there's 3. Now the point, imagine they're equal. I tell you what, that's not that too bad. Maybe the middle one's a bit big. Now, what I want to sort of show you here is what we should be expecting in terms of the time phasing of carbohydrates. So I want you to imagine the time phase I put here in relation to the competition. So -7 days is this first block. This is 7 days before competition. This second block here is -3 days. So this is -3 days before competition. And this block over here, we are talking about +1 hour. 1 hour after competition. So competition is kind of here somewhere, and I want to show you what carbo loading involves in relation to this. So 7 days before competition, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to, as the performer we're going to reduce the ingestion of carbs. So we're going to take on fewer carbs, and we are going to train. Okay, and what I say train is we're going to train hard. You know, we're going to perform. So 7 days before, we reduce our carbs intake. I mean, it's normally 60% of a daily dietary intake would be carbohydrates. We're going to reduce that. Okay, and we're going to do that for a period of about 4 days. 3 days before then, what we're going to do is we are going to increase carbs. Okay, so we start taking on carbs for in addition for about 3 days before, and we are going to, let's put that in there, and we are going to down arrow decrease training. Okay, so the 3 days before, we reduce training intensity and quantity, and what we do here is we increase our carbohydrate intake. Now, what that's going to cause is what we refer to as super compensation. Because if you storage of carbohydrates in the form of glycogen, that is, because what's going to happen here is, of course, you're training on low carbs for 4 days, and your body's there going to try and take on more carbohydrates in this period to cause an adjustment to the challenges that went before. And then 1 hour after performance, guys, what we're going to find here is that, as we've mentioned before, the performers should be taking on both carbs and proteins immediately after. And the reason we do this is we get that super compensation. Effectively, we store more glycogen. Therefore, when we go and run our marathon or we play our rugby match or whatever it happens to be, we've got a higher store in there. So super compensation. And what this, if I just write that out again, so what this super compensation actually means, super compensation, sounds like something you get if you get a nasty whiplash injury from a car accident. But what we're going to say here is that super compensation causes us to store greater than 2 hours of glycogen in the liver and in the muscles. In other words, we have a much greater store of carbohydrate in the form of glycogen that we can utilize in long duration activities. Thanks.